Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson tonight. Bernie Sanders is running for president again, not that he ever really stopped. Sanders announced his second campaign this morning in a 10-minute video. Before you drop everything and watch it, take half a moment to appreciate just how much America and the Democratic Party have changed over the past 4 years. Pull up Sanders' first presidential announcement speech. It was May 26, 2015 in Burlington, Vermont. Sanders looked a lot different then. But the second thing you'll notice if you watch it is how familiar his words sound. It's spooky. Virtually all of the themes in Sanders' announcement speech, his first one, are what in the end got Donald Trump elected president. The collapse of the middle class, the crushing cost of health care and student loans, the pointlessness of perpetual war in the Middle East, the distorting effect of Washington lobbyists and donors, the swamp, the dangers of corporate power, the need for better jobs and higher wages for Americans, the generational disaster that is our trade policy. It's all there, everything but build a wall. Sanders is often described as a 1970s-era socialist, and that's basically true. He honeymooned in the Soviet Union. He looks like he combs his hair with a balloon. But if you listen carefully, what Bernie Sanders was really selling in the last campaign was not Marxism. It was economic populism, and an awful lot of people agreed with it. Many of them wound up voting for Donald Trump in the general election. In case you've forgotten, here's what Bernie Sanders sounded like back then.
I am fighting to break up the large banks on Wall Street. But I do want the opportunity to tell them face to face what their greed and illegal behavior has done to this country. If Wall Street does not end its greed, we will end it for them.
Well, you could disagree about whether Wall Street and the big banks are really driving America's decline, like all politicians. Sanders was and is an overstater. But looking back, there was something touchingly old-fashioned about the way Bernie Sanders ran that campaign. Sanders made no appeal at all to interest groups. He explicitly opposed interest groups. He instead talked about national unity and the people left behind. His first announcement speech did not mention the words racism or sexism or, for that matter, abortion or gun control. He said nothing about immigration or non-citizens. Sanders was running for Americans, all of them, whether you agreed with him or not. Needless to say, Sanders quickly found himself at war with Democrats. The modern Democratic Party has no place for the idea of nationhood. It rejects the existence of universal interests and values. Instead of a common American culture, Democrats see only tribes. Now, Bernie Sanders is pushing 80, and he seemed completely bewildered by these changes in attitude. In the weeks after the 2016 election, Sanders told one reporter that Hillary Clinton lost the race because, quote, "It's not good enough to say, I am a woman, vote for me." Well, Sanders was right, obviously, but he was way too late. Modern Democrats are defined by identity politics. That's the idea that the accident of your birth determines what you're worth, your value. Some groups are favored, others are blamed and punished. What matters isn't what you do, the choices that you make. What matters is who you are genetically. By the time Brett Kavanaugh was nominated to the Supreme Court 6 months ago, Democrats had made this entirely explicit.
Women across this nation should be outraged at what these white men senators are doing to this woman.
This is all gross strategizing from 11 old white men.
It's a white man strategy that is politically dumb, in my opinion.
These people in Congress right now, in that Senate Judiciary Committee, these white men, old, by the way, are not protecting women.
Old white men. Not a favored group in the modern Democratic Party, to put it mildly. And yet Bernie Sanders is undeniably all three of those things. So how do you win the nomination of a party that hates you for qualities you can't change? Bernie Sanders is not the only Democrat facing this dilemma, far from it, nor is he the only one to realize that there's really only one solution. You have to embrace identity politics. Getting woke is the only option. So Bernie Sanders has done just that. Here's a clip from his second presidential announcement video released today.
Our campaign is about transforming our country and creating a government based on the principles of economic, social, racial, and environmental justice. Our campaign is about redoubling our efforts to end racism, sexism, homophobia, religious bigotry, and all forms of discrimination.
So that's the new Bernie Sanders, and he seems a lot smaller than the old version. Instead of saving America from predatory global capitalism, Sanders plans to save us from Donald Trump's racism and sexism. Okay, let's say he does that. What then? Racism and sexism aren't actually the biggest problems that America faces. Sorry, not even close, actually. Growing economic stratification and a dying middle class, those are the biggest problems. But nobody in Washington wants to talk about those things, and why would they? People in Washington are richer than ever. Any change to the status quo is a threat to them by definition. It's much better for them to have the population squabble over unresolvable questions of identity. A nation that's arguing about skin color is not asking how a tiny group of people is now flying private while almost everybody else has gotten poorer. So identity politics is a tactic designed to prevent conversations dangerous to the ruling class, obviously. It's also a way for some of the most privileged people in America to recast themselves as victims. Cory Booker, for example. Cory Booker went to Stanford, Oxford, and Yale. His parents were IBM executives. Booker has spent most of his career in the Senate carrying water for his fellow privileged people, his peers on Wall Street. Privileged? Yeah, Cory Booker defines that word. Now that he's running for president, it would be interesting to hear Cory Booker explain why he has allowed his friends in the finance world to continue to pay half the tax rate that you're probably paying now. But he likely doesn't want to talk about that. Instead, he'll probably spend most of his time talking about racism, including the racism he has personally experienced as a powerless person who went to Stanford, Oxford, and Yale, and whose parents were IBM executives. So you can see what's going on here. This is a scam. Identity politics is a scam, and it's not so different from the one that Jussie Smollett just pulled. Smollett is a rich actor with a hit TV show. That's fine. We used to call people like that pampered. But Smollett doesn't want to be thought of as pampered. Nobody does, really. So he recast himself as a victim. The people oppressing him, he told us, were Trump voters. Badly educated thugs from some rural backwater, probably. Inbreds who've never read a book. People who don't have Kamala Harris's personal cell phone number. People who probably don't even believe in global warming or like Thai food. Those people, they're the problem. They must be crushed. Somehow, the left is telling us, the weak are now oppressing the strong. That's their claim. The old left would have pushed back against this. They would have felt some sympathy for the people our economy has left behind, but not anymore. The new left reveres Cory Booker and Barack Obama. They're rallying behind Jussie Smollett. When Smollett's fraud was exposed, they defended him without saying so.
Well, the information's still coming out. I'm going to withhold until all the information actually comes out from on-the-record sources.
Okay, so I will say this about that case. I think that the facts are still unfolding. Once the investigation is concluded, then we can all comment. But I'm not going to comment until I know the outcome of the investigation.
So no one can admit that Jussie Smollett is not a victim. He's a rich guy who played the victim and blamed other people. Now, nobody's asked Bernie Sanders about that story yet, but he'd probably say the same thing. He has to say that. It's required now. Suraj Patel is an attorney and professor at NYU's Stern School of Business, and he joins us tonight. Mr. Patel, thanks very much for coming on.
Thanks, Tucker.
So how disappointing. I wasn't a Sanders voter, but I certainly respected his willingness to make a case for economic populism back in 2016, and I agree with a lot of the things he said, honestly. How disappointing is it to see him become another identity politics drone? Why is there no room in the Democratic Party for someone to just make a straightforward economic case?
Well, Tucker, I don't think that he isn't making an economic inequality case, but you cannot talk about economic inequality in this country without talking about racial and economic disparity because of the systems we've built, because of the legacy of slavery and Jim Crow and internment and all those things. What he's saying basically is that that things like race and inequality are inextricably intertwined based on the institutions we've built and the legacies of them. And it's only responsible that it's only
now you're confusing me because you're making a case that bears no relationship to the facts or the numbers. So the richest people in America are not white people. Immigrant groups, actually, including African immigrants, Indian immigrants, I think, are the richest group in the United States.
No, that's
your
right.
average Nigerian immigrant makes more than your average native-born white American. So it's a lot more complicated. I'm not sure what that means exactly, but I know that what you just said is totally false.
It is very complicated, but the fact of the matter
the fact of the matter is
that you are, by and large, statistically speaking, the darker you are in this country, the poorer you are. Some of that's
but hold on, wait, that's not true. Wait, hold on, slow down. That's not true. It's so much more complicated than that. That what you're saying is a lie. And so Asian immigrants, for example, have the highest educational attainment level and the highest incomes of any group in America. Okay, so if what you're saying is true, and again, I'll agree with you on this. It's super complicated. But what you're saying is not complicated. It's painting a picture of racial division that isn't backed up by the facts, and you know it.
No, that's not right. Look, Tucker, what we're saying is simply this. We know, for example, the criminal justice system creates significantly unequal outcomes for people based on their color or background. Like that black people are given stronger sentences, surveilled more often, and policed more often. That puts them into a cycle of poverty at times that you can't get another job after you have a felony on your record. You have a 1 in 3 chance of being incarcerated or put on parole by the time you're 30.
There's some truth to what you're saying, that people of all colors who are convicted of felonies have a really tough time digging out of it. And I have real sympathy for them.
So I think what I'm saying is Bernie Sanders is not...
Hold on. What you just said is untrue, and you know it's untrue, that the darker you are, the more oppressed you are, when in fact,
I didn't say
most
oppressed.
Poor people in America are white, as you know. The poorest state is the whitest state, West Virginia. So let's stop lying. Look, I'm not making a case for any racial group. I'm making a case for a non-racial approach to policy, which is the only one we can have without wrecking the country, no?
And there is no doubt that the single best argument and the single best candidate is going to be the one who is able to convince that white working class voter that they have more in common, their lot in life right now has more in common with a single black working class mother in Queens or somewhere than they do with someone like Jared or Ivanka, who are born with everything.
No, but you're offering another species of identity. Like, why do I care about the color of voters? I mean, Bernie Sanders in 2016 never mentioned anybody's color. He's like, look, you're getting exploited by your employer in these big companies. That was a colorblind case, and the Democratic Party hated it because it has a stake in racial division. You know that that's true.
Tucker, it's like I said, you can't approach the issue of inequality without talking about and looking at some of the racial disparities in it. And that's all people are saying.
Really? Then how did Nigerian immigrants wind up making more than native-born white Americans?
All Nigerian immigrants have not done that. All Nigerian immigrants do not make more money than all of the people.
But if it's as simple as the blacker you are, the more oppressed you are, like, that's just not true.
And that's not what I'm saying. You're simplifying this argument to make it sound ridiculous. Okay. The fact of the matter is, like I said, that identity is intertwined with this, and it's not that you need to sit there and always talk about identity of our voters, of ourselves that are running for office.
Okay.
What you have to do is at least show the curiosity and the understanding and the acknowledgement that we have significantly treated races differrace in this country in the past, and that creates
I have a lot of curiosity
today.
about what the facts actually are, which is why I'm bringing this up tonight. And I just think, look, race is a dead end. Let's bring back the old Bernie Sanders. You disagree. Mr. Patel, thank you very much for joining us. Appreciate it. Bernie Sanders, I have it on the brain. Tammy Bruce, who is not Bernie Sanders, but is also from New York and a radio host, president of Independent Women's Voice, and one of our favorites. So, Tammy, look, I'm not here to endorse Bernie Sanders' economic program. A lot of his ideas are dumb. But I always admired his willingness to stick with the universal principles over the grubby, creepy, divisive politics of race. Why has he given that up?
Well, as you've noted in your opening, this is a dynamic that has overcome the Democratic Party. And he's a politician. And perhaps he needs a fourth beach house. I don't know. But he does well as a politician, right? This is a career. And so he's appealing to a group of people who've been trained and who are now demanding for this kind of an extreme dynamic. And this is what's heartbreaking, is the civil rights movement was a demand for people not to be treated differently because of who they are. Was a demand for an elevation of people to be treated like everyone else. Identity politics is the cancer, is the opposite of that. It demands that we not only treat people differently because of who they are, but then condemn some and elevate others based on some kind of benefit we've assigned to a particular identity. It is the antithesis of what we fought for throughout the 60s and 70s, and frankly, beginning at the turn of the 20th century. This is how retrograde the Democrats have become, and it is what Americans reject. And so it's concerning that we see that this is happening with the Democrats, because we need a good, loyal opposition. But it certainly is not what America has been, it's not what we are now, and it's not what we want to become.
I mean, the only reason I keep hitting this is because I sincerely feel, and I mean this with my whole heart, that this is a threat to the unity of the country and that it makes people hate each other.
Well, that's the goal.
Is there any Democrat who is running on a universal platform? Can there ever be another one again?
Well, there can be. Look, I'm a Democrat. There are other Democrats who perhaps have maybe already switched and identify as an independent or registered as that. It is a sensibility about a classical liberalism that, frankly, now it clearly is represented by the conservative ideal.
Yeah.
This desire for independent, for freedom, personal responsibility, capitalism, that we're only limited by our own ambition and imagination, that is the American ideal. And that is something both parties can embrace. What you're hearing now...
Yeah, I hope so, because the rest of this stuff is absolutely a dead end.
And it's meant to turn us against each other, Tucker. That's the goal, is to distract us.
It's a diversion. That's look who's practicing it. Woke billionaires. Tammy, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
So, Jussie Smollett apparently concocted a fake hate crime, but it's only the latest example of the left using phony stories to vilify its enemies. We'll investigate and expose that tactic in more detail after the break. Well, I'll give this to Jussie Smollett. He was pretty clear about what he said happened to him. He claimed he was violently assaulted outside his apartment in Chicago because of his race in a premeditated attack by a pair of psychotic, racist Trump supporters. Watch.
I see the attacker masked, and he said, "This MAGA country punches me right in the face."
And there is no doubt in your mind what motivated this attack?
I could only go off of their words. I mean, who says empire, this MAGA country, ties a noose around your neck and pours bleach on you?
Just for the record, when you don't ask any follow-up questions and just nod sympathetically, it's not journalism, it's affirmation. But on the internet, there were people who were paying close attention to the claims Smollett was making, and they didn't add up, and they began publicly doubting his case. Smollett did not answer their questions. Instead, he denounced these people as racists. Watch.
I'm pissed off.
What is it that has you so angry? Is it the attackers?
It's the attackers, but it's also the attacks. How can you doubt that? Like, how do you not believe that? It's the truth.
Now, reports apparently leaked from the Chicago Police Department say that all of this was a scam, that Smollett planned this from the very beginning and hired others to carry it out. We have more information on the case tonight. Matt Finn joins us from Chicago at the exact intersection where Smollett said he was attacked. Matt, good to see you.
Tucker, good evening. Behind me is the door that police say Jussie Smollett used to get inside into his apartment building on the night of that alleged attack. And now we're learning this evening that Jussie Smollett was convicted of a DUI and lying to police in 2007, according to court documents obtained by Fox News. This arrest was confirmed by an LA County clerk who tells us that the birth date that we have for 36-year-old Jussie Smollett matches the birth date of the Jussie Smollett that was arrested for this DUI and giving false information to police. We reached out to Smollett's legal team, who did not deny this arrest. We have not been able yet to pinpoint exactly what Smollett lied to police about, but it's related to a vehicular charge. Smollett was sentenced to 36 months of probation. Also new tonight, Chicago police tell Fox News that the two brothers that CBS reports confessed to carrying out the hoax with met with prosecutors and detectives late this afternoon. Tonight, Chicago police are still waiting for Smollett to respond to their very important request for a follow-up interview. Police tell us they are giving Smollett a, quote, responsible amount of time. What happens next depends on Smollett's actions. Police can present this case to prosecutors or a grand jury seeking an arrest warrant, and tonight we're learning police appear to be doing just that. Smollett, who was very cooperative with police before this whole story dramatically altered, is apparently no longer responding phone calls to police requesting more information. Tonight, police are no longer insisting Smollett is the victim. They're now referring to him as the person who filed the police report. Smollett's attorneys say anyone who says Smollett was in on this attack is a liar. And here in Illinois, filing a false police report is a Class 4 felony. It's punishable up to 3 years in prison. It's also probational. But Smollett might even be in more trouble with the FBI, who is investigating that alleged death threat letter with the MAGA return address that was sent to Smollett just 1 week prior to this alleged attack. Tucker.
Matt Finn for us in Chicago. Thanks, Matt. Well, the Jussie Smollett story is amazing, but it's exceptional only to the extent it has received much more publicity than most hate hoaxes, and there are many of them. Bogus stories concocted by the left for political reasons and repeated without question by a compliant media. Dr. Wilfred Riley is an associate professor at Kentucky State University. He's the author of the book, Hate Crime Hoax, How the Left is Selling a Fake Race War. Professor, thanks very much for coming on tonight. So you've looked at a lot of these cases. What would you say, generally speaking, is the point of them?
Well, thanks for having me, Tucker. And as you said, first of all, there are quite a few of these cases. What we find is that virtually all of the high-profile, widely reported hate crimes over the past 2 to 3 years have been hoaxes. That extends to Jussie Smollett.
I'm going to interrupt you there. I just want to make sure I understand what you're saying. Virtually all of the well-publicized hate crimes in the last several years have been hoaxes?
Very, very many of the best publicized incidents, Eastern Michigan, Air Force Academy, Yasmin Saweed, the Burnt Black Church, the young African-American woman that said that she was literally urinated on by white men, Kean College, Wisconsin Parkside, so on down the line. All of those incidents that I've mentioned, I think you could probably put Covington Catholic in that category.
Yes, you sure
Those
could.
have been not actual incidents of interracial violence. They have been hate hoaxes. This is also, by the way, very often true of hate hoaxes reported by the alt-right. But the phenomenon does seem concentrated on the left. Very many high-profile hate hoax stories, probably most simply turn out to be fakes. I'm not surprised that the Jussie Smollett story turned out to be a hoax, and I don't think you are either, or that very many other people are.
I'm not. Now, most hoaxes are designed to enrich the person who perpetrates them. I mean, they're scams, right? They're scams that bring the criminal money. But money doesn't change hands in these cases. So what is the point of doing it?
Well, I think that's a fascinating question, Tucker. First of all, I will say that in a fair number of cases, money does change hands if you're talking about insurance money. So in Chicago, for example, we saw the Velvet Ultra Lounge case, where the owner of a popular gay and bisexual nightclub burnt his own business to the ground, collected, I believe, a $20,000+ check for that, and attributed that originally to homophobes. So that is a partial motivation. But I will say that I think a broader motivation for these hoaxes is that the demand for bigots in America greatly exceeds the supply as of right now. Yes. So it is not much of a secret that in America we have a very well-funded grievance industry. The Southern Poverty Law Center, which 30, 40 years back did a great deal of good, but currently has an active invested endowment of $432 million. That's unbelievable. They take in $58 to $96 million every year, at least in terms of the records that I've looked at going back some time. Black Lives Matter right now up to about 400,000 social media fans, 360,000 followers. Right. You have organizations like CARE, Council for American Islamic Relations. Right.
Someone's got to justify the existence of all these fundraising machines. Professor,
quite right.
This is a fascinating conversation, and I appreciate your coming on tonight. Thank you.
All right.
Jussie Smollett's phantom assault is not the only bogus hate crime, the hate hoax, creating blowback tonight. Nick Sandmann of Covington High School was tarred as a modern Simon Legree for the sin of standing in place and smiling while an activist beat a drum in his face. Now, Sandmann is suing the Washington Post, the vanity publication of the world's richest man, Jeff Bezos. His lawyers say the paper, quote, bullied an innocent child with an absolute disregard for the pain and destruction its attacks would cause to his life. The suit The first of what could be many suits seeks $250 million in damage. That is, of course, a fitting number. It's the same amount that Jeff Bezos paid to turn that paper into his personal Pravda. So we'll be following that with some interest. A departing CBS reporter says the press has become so liberal they can't report the news, only produce propaganda. Brit Hume's been in the news business a long time. He'll join us next. Plus, dumpster fire expert Richard Painter says we ought to just pull Trump out of the White House with nets because he's not competent to govern. 25th Amendment. That conversation after the break.
There is an inferno raging in Washington. But here in the land of 10,000 lakes, we know how to put out a fire.
War correspondent Lara Logan has left CBS News after a number of years there. She said goodbye by doing something unthinkable. She found an obvious unspoken truth and said it out loud. While appearing on the Mike Ritland podcast, Logan described the press as so liberal that they're unable to perform their basic duties as journalists. Watch.
And the media everywhere is mostly liberal. But in this country, 85% of journalists are registered Democrats. So that's just a fact, right? There's one Fox, and there's many, many, many more organizations on the left. But the problem is that the weight of all of these organizations on one side of the political spectrum, when you turn on your computer or you walk past the TV, if they're all saying the same thing, the weight of that convinces you that it's true. You don't question it because everyone is saying it. I didn't even notice that there was a bias in the media. You read one story after another or hear it, and it's all based on one anonymous administration official, former administration official, right? I mean, that's not journalism, that's
Fox News senior political analyst Brit Hume has been in the media for a long time. We mean that in a good way. He joins us tonight. What do you think of what Lara Logan said, Brit?
Well, she's absolutely right, and it's perfectly obvious that she's right. And the striking thing about it is that as many of her colleagues and mine and yours deny it as do. They do. And I've always thought this about bias and about fairness in news coverage. Fairness is not really a policy or even an attitude. Fairness is really kind of a skill. And it begins with a recognition of your bias. Once you do that, it's really not all that difficult if you're aware that you don't like this particular politician or you feel this way about a particular issue and you're covering something related to it. It's not that hard to screen it out of your coverage. It really isn't. Lawyers do this every day. They represent clients they think are guilty. Judges decide cases in favor or against people that they like or dislike all the time. It's not impossible. It's a discipline. It's a skill. But if you won't admit it to yourself, you got no chance. And it used to be, that the editors of newspapers around the country, really led in those days by the New York Times, were very careful to make sure reporters wrote their stories in neutral language. That discipline, I'm afraid, Tucker, is out the window. The morning after the State of the Union address by the president, the Washington Post had a banner headline that said, "A discordant appeal for unity." Now, people may have found the speech discordant. I'm confident that the journalist who wrote the story did. But that's an opinion. And in the lead of the story, it was referred to as a dissonant speech. Well, that's a judgment. That's an opinion. It had no business in that in the news story. Now, if you want to have editorials and denounce the speech and have columnists who write, all kinds of invective about it, that's all fine. That's the way it's supposed to work.
That's why you have columnists.
That's right. That's why you have an editorial page, and all the restraints seem to be coming off now. And the media is it is no accident the media is at its lowest level in public opinion that anybody can remember.
So here's maybe an example of that, and you had a strong reaction to this over the weekend. The 2020 campaign reporters fawning over Kamala Harris and giving her fashion advice during her visit to Columbia, South Carolina. This seemed to grate on you. Why?
Well, here you had this glowing tweet published by a young journalist who was assigned by CBS News to the Kamala Harris campaign. And she and her colleagues were with Senator Harris as she visited some female-owned enterprises, including a store. where one of them picked out a jacket. It looked like a Rubik's Cube, as you can see, and insisted that the candidate try it on and got her to buy it, and then tweeted about it glowingly. Well, I'm sorry. There's nothing wrong with going into the store with a candidate who's visiting, as a campaign event, a store, and it's certainly with the candidate's rights to try on clothes. It is totally and obviously howlingly inappropriate for the members of the media to come across and start recommending what the candidate should wear and encouraging them to buy things.
You were the White House correspondent for ABC News for 8 years. You never bought clothing for Ronald Reagan?
I didn't, because I was covering Bush, and and then later Clinton, and I never recommended any clothing to either one of them. Now look, there's things you can do. There's things you can do, Tucker. I mean, you can have a meal with someone you're covering, right? You sit across the table, you discuss things. You might buy the meal. You can be a anchor man invited, or woman, and invited to the White House on State of the Union Day and be entertained at lunch by the president. Those things are arm's length. They're perfectly appropriate, and they've been going on for a long time. But this kind of chummy, let's go shopping stuff is obviously something inappropriate. And the fact that these journalists who were involved in that defended it, and lots of others too, shows you how far down this road we've gotten. Can you imagine, for example, someone with with a hard right candidates, helping them try on a jacket and I mean, it's just unimaginable. Not if you're a reporter. But you shouldn't be doing that.
No back rubs, no picking out clothes. Those are my personal rules. I've lived by them.
I'm totally with you.
It's great to see you. Thank you.
Thanks, Tucker.
California's leading cities are the richest cities on this continent, and yet they're unbelievably dirty. Why is that? After the break, we'll tell you. Well, California, our biggest, formerly most prosperous state, is increasingly a place that's impossible to live if you are not rich. Housing costs are sky high. Public schools are failing. The state's chief concern seems to be enabling illegal immigrants and enlarging its homeless population, which it's very good at. John Stossel recently visited San Francisco and found officials working hard there to erect a homeless utopia. Here's part of it.
Francisco is generous. It offers street people food stamps, free shelter, train tickets, and $70 a month in cash.
San Francisco is just a good place to hang out.
Like many, these two come here from out of town.
Do you like the lifestyle?
Of course I do.
As you just heard, they love the freedom of not having to follow the rules.
So the homeless stay on the streets, and every day new people arrive.
Normal people are just about sick of it. A new poll finds that 53% of Californians, and critically 63% of millennials living in California, want to flee. Ethan Behrman is someone who's staying in California because he hosts a radio show there. He joins us tonight. So, I mean, I got to say, there's no blaming the right for this. It's a one-party state, for good or ill. In this case, looks like ill. And so at some point, do you think, like, what liberal lunacy gave birth to this feudal disaster called California? Has it caused any soul searching for you?
Absolutely. The fifth biggest economy in the world, and you talk about the homeless problem, we can look to Ronald Reagan, the conservative Republican, when he was governor, who turned everybody loose from the psychiatric institutions and the abuses that they had in the early 20th century. But instead of having a plan to get people the proper care they needed in the neighborhoods, he let them free. And
so
now we have federal
I'm just wondering, I'm sorry, let's just pause really quick. When was that? Oh, was that like 50 years ago that he was governor of California?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's only gotten worse because of the laws, but we have new leadership now, Tucker, that is actually addressing the problem.
So you're saying that the homeless problem in Los Angeles and San Francisco, not just, but mostly in those two cities, is the fault of someone who is dead and hasn't been governor in 50 years. That's really the answer?
That's the root. That's the genesis of it. When we decided that we can't keep people who need mental health care, conservatorship is the term around it. There are a fair percentage that John Stossel, of course, found 2 people that he could use as an example, as an anecdote to prove how bad it is. But the point is this. We have people who need mental health care. And because of what Governor Reagan did and what the federal courts have ensured since then, is we have a hard time with it. State Senator Scott Wiener actually has new legislation.
You and I both know that closing down the sanitariums, the mental hospitals, was a liberal project from beginning to end. Reagan was the governor. He signed it. Shouldn't have. I agree. but that if you're blaming Ronald Reagan for modern-day homelessness in California, you're not really looking yourself in the mirror and admitting, like, maybe my dumb ideas had something to do with this. I mean, honestly.
No, because now we do have new ideas. So State Senator Scott Wiener has a new bill that's been passed, experimenting with a new conservatorship program. We have Mayor London Breed in San Francisco and Mayor Eric Garcetti in Los Angeles addressing it head on. Mayor Garcetti actually got funding to finally build some housing that was a requirement from the federal courts before we could do something about getting people off the streets.
Wait, so
Mayor
just to be clear, so you're saying, hold on, you're saying very quick, the driving problem is profound mental illness, but we want to put the profoundly mentally ill, schizophrenics, for example, in their own housing unsupervised? So that's a good idea, you think?
No, it's a bifurcated problem. You have mental illness on one hand. We also have the issue of a severe shortage of housing, and the courts prohibited anything being done until we got housing built. Mayor Garcetti's working on, as is Mayor Breed.
Darn that Reagan! Oh my God, Ethan, great to see you. Thank you very much. Well, the U.S. is winding down its military adventures in a number of different countries, but appears to be on the brink of something big, maybe an intervention in Venezuela. Yesterday, the president said, quote, all options are open in that country. Meanwhile, National Security Advisor John Bolton, an advocate of war everywhere, went on Twitter to praise Colombia for accepting Venezuelan refugees and then said the rest of the world, including us, should show, quote, the same generosity. In other words, get ready for a massive migration wave into this country. Are we ready? Douglas McGregor is a retired U.S. Army colonel, author of the book Margin of Victory, and a frequent guest. Great to see you, Colonel. So that sounds like a public warning of imminent action that we should prepare for refugees in this country.
Well, the only thing that I can say is that I agree with is that Latin America should solve this problem. This is not something we should involve ourselves in. If we go to Venezuela with military power, not only will we be initiating a war, effectively, for regime change, and we know